What's up guys, my name's Petey from JD2020 and today I am joined with Josh Olin, who is the former community manager of Treyarch back during the release of Call of Duty World at War and the first Black Ops game, which of course was the one of 3 games in the series which went on to be one of the most successful series in the franchise, as we know, with Black Ops 1, Black Ops 2 and Black Ops 3. So prior to being a community manager, Josh Olin actually used to run a website called CODHQ.com, which was an equivalent to Charlie Intel today during the years of 2004 until his new role at Treyarch in 2008. So essentially, this man is behind one of the first steps into the whole community concept and community websites and so on for the Call of Duty franchise. So I'll stop talking from here and let you introduce yourself.
Yes, Petey. Hi. Thanks for asking me to come do this, and thanks for all the work you guys are doing on Charlie Intel. It's really humbling to be considered your equivalent back then, because I think you guys are just doing you're doing stuff in ways that we never were back in COD HQ. But it's always great to see like really passionate community minds, community leaders want to take the reins again and drive forward, helping to make that community positive and successful.
For sure. Just to familiarize everyone, so what kind of website was it? Was it like was it basically Charlie Intel, but the 2005 version, essentially?
Yeah, it was built in older technology. We had a CMS called PHP Nuke that we were using, and we had heavily modified it. Yeah, it was a big. We did news, we did interviews, we did downloads. Like we actually secured the first. We broke the worldwide news that Call of Duty 4 was in development at Infinity Ward.
No way.
Yeah, I called up Grant Collier on the phone, and he gave me this little impromptu interview, and then we actually were able to break the news for the first time. We weren't able to reveal that it was Modern Warfare. I was able to speculate, but we were able to break that news worldwide instead of someone like IGN or GameSpot, and that was like a huge deal to us. It kind of legitimized us as a real site instead of news. They had been flying us out to a lot of their preview events instead of as press, so we were being treated like a proper news outlet, like you guys do. I'm sure Activision continues the tradition today with all of their fan sites, and we would host downloads and we would host mods. Back in 2004, 2005, that's before YouTube existed. So like you used to download a trailer as a AVI file inside of a RAR, right? And you would download the WinRAR, and then you would extract the video and play it in Real Player. Like that's how you used to watch trailers back then. So we used to host all those too.
Wow, that's crazy. And this kind of rolled into your involvement with Call of Duty, right? So this is kind of the gateway to working with Activision and such.
Yep, I went out and of course we talked to I talked to a lot of people, networked with a lot of folks at Activision, at Infinity Ward. And we were, when the time came that Treyarch needed a community manager themselves to sort of help rebrand the studio. Back then, they had a pretty unfavorable perception in the community, even on my site. Although I tried to treat them as fair as I could. The natural thought was, well, let's go take this guy who's already really well known in the community. Back then I was probably one of the most influential people, because again, this is pre-Twitch, pre-YouTube, so there weren't even really influencers in the way that we know them now, right? There weren't celebrities, there weren't esport pros. So, modders, community leaders, they were really the most influential people in the community at that time. And it was just really sort of another era.
Very cool. So for everyone watching this video, the reason I decided to reach out to Josh Olin is not only because of his involvement in the franchise in previous years, but because recently on Twitter and such, I've noticed he's put out a few tweets in regards to the current state and the current direction of the Call of Duty franchise. Most specifically relating to a recent tweet which said, COD has got to find a way to solve its multiplayer accessibility problem, or the franchise will have nothing but decline in its future. So that's quite a bold tweet, and it does also indicate your thoughts and opinions behind the direction in which Call of Duty and Activision are taking with the franchise. You also mentioned following that, because I actually replied to your tweet on Twitter about user acquisition stops being the priority at Activision, in your opinion, followed by a multiplayer is more intimidating than ever for new players. So I don't suppose you could elaborate on that a little bit more for all of us, just to get a bit of background behind your thoughts on the franchise and its direction.
Yeah, well, my biggest concern with the way innovation's been handled lately in Call of Duty is innovation seems to just mean faster, louder, bigger explosions, more kill streaks, and core movement, in it, making you move faster and fly around in the air more, and wall running, and I'm not saying that wall running's bad, and I'm not saying that a lot of these core movement innovations or other gameplay innovations aren't useful or aren't important. But I think that when that's all you're doing, or when you're doing too much of it, and when it's too much focused in that one way, you run the risk of just amplifying the complexity, three, four, five-fold over the game. And so now, I got Infinite Warfare, played through the campaign, loved it, booted up into multiplayer, just played one round and was so overwhelmed. And I'm a Call of Duty vet. Like, I've been playing since the first one. I've played all of them. I used to play competitively, and this is not. It's so overwhelming, even for someone like me who is really well informed and in the know, that I was sort of disincentivized to keep playing. And I know that that's not the case for everybody. And I know that for like super hardcore people, particularly ones who were sort of raised on the later era of the Call of Duty franchise, we'll say Black Ops 2 onward, they can still be very proficient and effective in it. But I think that, I was doing fine at Black Ops 2 as well. I was doing fine at Black Ops 1, but it's completely different from then until now. And I think that, if I just try to imagine a brand new player who's never played any Call of Duty who picks up this type of Call of Duty game, I imagine they're going to be really overwhelmed with it. I imagine that they're going to have a real tough time getting into multiplayer. And so that, of course, is going to have some sort of implication. It's going to have some sort of impact on the franchise's ability to keep growing. And if you have barriers to user acquisition, the only logical conclusion is going to be you're going to have an ever shrinking install base as your current install base starts to eventually atrophy and wear off, or get their attention pulled in other directions by their franchises. If you don't have that revolving door giving you a net positive gain on users, then you're going to just see shrinkage, and that, I don't want that for the COD community.
For sure. So the interesting thing is actually, so when you were involved in Call of Duty World at War and Call of Duty Black Ops, those two games were essentially the very part of the way in which the franchise was just, exploding in terms of acquisition of new players, all that kind of stuff. Around that kind of time, I was a player. I was a lot younger. I was a younger person, working or at college or whatever it was. I used to love and just come home and play Black Ops 1 for hours on end. And in my opinion, at least in terms of the direction of the franchise, I see where they're making some decisions in terms of adding more and more to the game to try and feed the thirst that everyone has in the Call of Duty community to have more and more and more in the game, because over the course of a few years, we were getting very much the same kind of concept in terms of the game, with different maps, slightly different weapons, slightly different kill streaks, but ultimately it was the same formula. And so I guess in Activision's eyes, they were thinking to themselves, hey, there's a red flag here, there's not enough, we got to add more and more and more, because the existing player base is getting a bit tired of this. And, in the long run, it's not going to work out. I don't know whether you think that's the case or not. But ultimately, I feel as if around the time of Black Ops and such, they were getting everything right in terms of appealing to brand new players to the franchise, and at the same time, it's catering towards the existing player base. But in my opinion, I don't feel as if they've retain the connection with the player base in recent years, especially with advanced movement, which I want to talk about with you, if you don't mind, because this is one of the biggest subjects in the community right now. Advanced movement, people think is ridiculous. They think it doesn't fit into Call of Duty. They don't feel as if it makes a Call of Duty what it is, in which is boots on the ground, experience with balanced gameplay, all that kind of stuff. So, in my opinion, I think they've added boosts to jumps and all that kind of stuff with the intention of trying to attract more players from such franchises as Titanfall and so on, and at the same time just modernize the franchise, I guess you could say. What do you think about advanced movement? Because everyone is crying out for return to the boots of ground and all that kind of stuff. So I want to know what you think about it, really.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if they do return boots to the ground in a future one. I think that maybe there was this reaction, and I don't know because I wasn't there for this part of it, this era, but I think there was probably a reaction to Titanfall a bit. Those guys were making a similar type of experience for Call of Duty when they broke off, and I think there was a reaction, maybe an overreaction to that. And this rush to want to compete with that probably fueled it a little bit when, which is sort of, to me, taking your eye off the ball. I don't think that Titanfall should be perceived as your biggest competitor. Certainly not, not yet. I think that in a way they almost lost their way a little bit. And you're right. Like that was one of those innovations that I think that, each studio sort of built on and tried to outdo the former, and everybody sort of got stuck in this direction. And now all that core movement almost corners Call of Duty into a box, because you can't return to a historical context with all that core movement because well, you can't have jetpacks in World War II, right, or World War I.
Yeah, for
So
sure.
now they're almost trapped in a way in the future. Now I'm positive that they've got people working on ways to come around that, right? And you look at the way Battlefield just did it this year with Battlefield 1, right? They could have gone that same direction trying to outperform, but they had Titanfall in their portfolio, so they were able to say, okay, well, we already have our jetpack fast core movement game. That unlocks us and makes us able to go into historical context of Battlefield 1. So I think that they were able to capitalize on the best of both worlds, but meanwhile, Call of Duty is kind of stuck in a lot of ways stuck between a rock and a hard place because I get the need to want to keep innovating, to want to keep moving faster, but there's it's doing a lot of it's doing a lot to sort of draw the accessibility really down. You were talking about when we were working on Black Ops and World at War, yeah, we were introducing new things to the game, but we weren't doing it at a clip and at a rate that is happening now. And we always had other elements that would help a new player experience. Like Black Ops had boot camp, right? We had a bots mode that you could go into and play that was super accessible for new players to the franchise. We had local split screen multiplayer play where you could, if you had a new player, a brother, a sister, a friend, a parent who wanted to get into the game, you could play together on the couch and help teach them. And that was a more friendly and a less intimidating way of learning the game. So, we had these other mechanisms, and today a mechanism for user acquisition, a vehicle for user acquisition absolutely has changed. And today it's probably more about esports. But then, I don't think that there's the same level of innovation being put behind spectator experience, put behind viewer experience on these broadcasts that that you would need to keep up pace with the changing times, which is now new player acquisition maybe is more through esports and through watching online. So we were thinking about it really carefully, and we put a lot of thought behind what vehicles we wanted to use through our game for new player acquisition. And it just doesn't seem like, at least just from the outside looking in, that there's really that same level of discipline or thought going into it in 2016.
I think honestly, I completely agree with what you've said. Actually, just a really quick question, actually, purely based on your opinion of the franchise and such. Do you honestly think they can go back from being this advanced movement mechanic to just simply boots on the ground with nothing added on top, such as dolphin diving or boost sliding, anything like that, or just the ability to slide along the floor that we had in Call of Duty Ghosts, for example? Do you honestly feel as if the franchise or the community is able to return to such a drastic reduction in advanced movement as we've had in the last 4 or 5 years now, with the introduction of advanced warfare and such? When they had the exosuit, now we have the boost jumping wall running as we had in Black Ops 3 alongside Infinite Warfare, which had the same mechanic also. So you honestly think that the franchise can go back to simply being a grounded experience? You mentioned Battlefield, but of course Battlefield has always really been on the ground, essentially. They had Battlefield 2142, which again was also on the ground. You couldn't boost jump, you couldn't run along walls, anything like that. Despite that game being based in the future, it was still very grounded, as was Black Ops 2, for example, as well. So I'm interested to see, do you honestly think they can go back to just a standard core boots on the ground experience, like let's say the Modern Warfare franchise or Black Ops 1 and 2, given the fact, of course, it's just changed so much?
No, I think you're bringing up a lot of good points, and that's why I think Call of Duty is going to struggle more than Battlefield did, let's say, in doing that, because you're right. People, like I said, they're kind of painted themselves in this box, in this corner with all these advanced movement mechanics. I think what you're going to see is all these core movement innovations have done two things. They've, one, made core movement a lot smoother and a lot more fluid, and that's gotten better, genuinely better every year. And two, it's gotten a lot faster and gotten a lot more overwhelming. So I think what you'll probably end up seeing is a lot of the similar mechanics will remain, like sliding, right? Because you can slide without a jetpack. So you'll have sliding, you'll have very smooth, streamlined mantling over objects. You'll have jumping and ledge grabbing. I think what you're going to find is core movement with wherever they end up netting out, maybe next year or the year after. I think you will find a more boots on the ground, more grounded experience that still feels really fluid and still feels really nice, really good and polished. Because that's the one thing with core movement that Call of Duty's always gotten really right and that I couldn't praise enough.
essentially like ground movement, boots on the ground, but chained movement at the same time.
That's correct. Yeah. So it will be less intimidating. It'll be a little bit less fast paced, but it's still going to feel like you have a lot of freedom of control and a freedom of power and movement. I think that with Modern Warfare Remastered, with the success that they found with that, and by the way, tip my hat to Raven. Couldn't have better things to say about it. I think that that kind of demonstrates that there's still, granted, they have the nostalgia factor they're working off of, so that's giving them a huge benefit of the doubt, a huge leg up. But I think that people are still able to function in that environment with next to no core movement. In that game, when you mantle an object, you can't even keep your gun up, right? So
for sure.
It's so different, but people are still having a really good time with it, and so I think that it's still doing really well. So I think that that's kind of your indicator that people are gonna be okay when you take away some of their toys, especially as long as you still make them feel like they're just as lethal and proficient on the battlefield.
So that's the end of part 1. Be sure to come back tomorrow for part 2, where we delve more into Call of Duty 2017 from Sledgehammer Games and beyond in terms of the franchise and the direction it goes in, and of course the changes we might see in terms of maps, weapons, movement, all that kind of stuff as well. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a like, and as always, subscribe for further Charlie Intel content every 1 to 2 days. Thanks for watching, guys. See you in the next video. Goodbye.